In this video, we help you do the analysis on the question, can you afford to retire? Coming up next on Holy Schmidt.
Holy Schmidt!
Can you afford to retire? This is a complicated question that many people, in fact, most people ask almost always throughout their entire life, particularly as they get closer and closer to full retirement age, 50s and 60s. This is complicated, by the way, because the definition of retirement varies from person to person. For some people, they worked their entire life for that moment where they can walk out of the office, the factory, wherever it was that they were working, and enjoy the good life. They saved a lot, and now is their time to unleash. For others, every day above ground is a good day. Anything beyond that is a gift. It's also complicated because generally, retirement publications get very clear on only one part of the equation, the income part. We use rules of thumb like the 4% rule, which basically says that we can spend 4% of our financial assets plus inflation throughout our entire retirement life. Or the 1/25th rule, which effectively says you can spend 1/25th of your retirement assets throughout your entire life. The 1/25th rule, by the way, is effectively the 4% rule, just called something else. Even with these rules, society seems to ignore the very real fact that many people retire without nearly this amount in their investment accounts or savings accounts, and they still retire well. Why is that? Well, for most people, the answer to the question, can we afford to retire, is probably, but on what terms? If I was having this discussion with a well-known Hollywood movie star, they may need $5 or $10 million per year just to make ends meet. Could they live on less? Well, probably. For starters, they don't need to live in a $35 million mansion overlooking the Pacific Ocean with accompanying staff. They might still need the bodyguards because, well, they're famous, but they can probably sell the yacht. Then there's the teacher, who probably made no more than $65,000 per year in his or her life. They have a bit of savings and maybe a reasonable pension, but because of the way many teachers are paid, they may not qualify for Social Security because they never actually contributed to Social Security. However, their lifestyle was never about money. It was about service, a life well lived. In retirement, they have the love and respect of their family and the community, and modest cash flow to live off of, and because they live modestly their entire life, they may not even notice the difference. The point is that for most people at the right time, retirement age, 65-ish, they can afford to retire. It's just where do they place their value? Where do they want to spend their funds? The rest of this video will discuss the strategies around this question. Let me begin by acknowledging what most of these videos don't, and that is what's important to me may not be important to you, or shall we say, not as important anyway. With that in mind, I've arranged this video in retirement tiers based on what the majority of people consider important. Now, this will vary with what you think, at least some of it will, particularly in the later tiers as you approach the category of wealthy. Let's start with a nearly universal point that most people won't disagree with, and that is you need to put your health and safety first in retirement. This means proper medical care, nutrition. It means living in a safe, comfortable place. This is the bare minimum. It's the Spartan minimum. And anything above this is an additive to the enjoyment of retirement. There are 5 basic categories where retirees spend their money: housing, transportation, healthcare, food, and entertainment. But how you spend in these categories will determine if you can afford to retire. Let's talk about the first level. I call this a Spartan retirement. If you accomplish this, you have the recipe for the most basic level of retirement. But it is also quite liberating because you know exactly where you stand, and frankly, knowing what you can and can't do is 2/3 of the battle when it comes to getting ready and entering retirement. A Spartan retirement means that you think of you and if you have a spouse or a partner or your partner, but basically no one else. Of course, the world doesn't always work this way, particularly if you have others that are dependent on you for financial support. But this type of retirement assumes that you move those obligations away from you, because in a Spartan retirement, you can't afford to take on those obligations. By the way, even in a wealthy retirement, moving those obligations away from you makes good sense, because you want to be able to teach a person to fish, not give a person a fish, using the old analogy. Most of the time, the person receiving the funds from you is far better off long-term if it's not an entitlement, because the entitlements end and then they have no skills to continue on for the rest of their life. They have to develop those skills at that point in time. It's better for them to develop those skills now versus in the future. For many of you, living in a Spartan retirement means thinking differently. For example, have you considered renting a room rather than renting an apartment? The cost is sometimes 50, 75% less. In many cases, it increases your social interaction to boot, which is a very, very good thing in retirement. Some of you might remember the 1980s TV sitcom Golden Girls. It was about 4 older women sharing an apartment in Miami, including my personal favorite, one Betty Marion White, who played Rose. While the show was fiction, this arrangement isn't uncommon for those who are single and live on a very small budget. Right now, particularly now, there are a lot of people who are looking for extra money, and finding a room to let is easier than ever. You might even know someone who hasn't thought of this yet, but in the process of discussing it with them, you might be helping them help themselves and help you at the same time. Across this great country, there are rooms for rent that range from $500 a month to $2,000 a month or more, depending on what's being offered. Size of the room, location, amenities, are utilities included? Does it have a separate entrance? These variables and more will determine the rent that you pay if you let out a room from someone. Sometimes you can even arrange to have the rent reduced if you do work around the home. While there are a lot of ways to find rooms, you can start your search at one of these 7 websites. You'll probably be able to see most of the open inventory at one of these. Roomster, which is at roomster.com, Padmapper, which is at padmapper.com, Roomies, which is at roomies.com, Rent, which is at rent.com, Kangaroom, which is at kangaroom.com, Craigslist, which is at craigslist.com, and Spare Room, which is at spareroom.com. On this list, you will find nearly endless listings. One will certainly suit your budget. Now, on this point, renting a room is certainly not the only way to keep your housing costs down. One commenter a few months ago indicated that he built out the basement of his son's home and he lives there rent-free, and in return, when his son sells his home in the distant future, his son gets the improvements free of charge. Everyone wins. But to be super clear, managing your housing costs is job one if you're going to live a Spartan retirement, because for most people, that's their top expense. Next is healthcare. Now, despite the very real issues people face with healthcare around this country, by the time you reach retirement, you're provided with the tools to afford healthcare. What we're talking about is Medicare, Part A and Part B, and or Medicare supplements. Yes, you will need to pay for expanded coverage, but it is a bargain compared to private healthcare. For reference, the average cost for healthcare and retirement for a household, not an individual, but a household, is $575 per month. This includes premiums, prescriptions, copays, and other related costs. You'll need to choose the right supplemental plan to minimize costs. Generally speaking, if a plan offers an HMO or a PPO style coverage, it's going to be less expensive than if it's a traditional medical plan where you can go anywhere and you just have a deductible and coinsurance. Nutrition is next. The average retirement household spends between $6,500 and $7,000 per year on nutrition, depending on which statistic you use, but there or thereabouts, this equates to $575 per month. About 1/3 of this is spent eating out and 2/3 eating in. If you want to know more about this, see my video, Retirees Spend 80% of Their Income in These 5 Areas. I'll put a link at the end so that you don't need to stop the video now to find that video. Finally, there's transportation. You do need to get from where you are to where you want to go on a daily basis in most cases. Now, if you're living a Spartan retirement, this usually comes in the form of a Metro card, some sort of train pass, bus pass, or combination. We'll talk about a car in the next level of retirement, but if we're talking about minimizing your costs, a combination of Metro card and maybe Uber in an emergency is probably the way to go. So add up the costs of the least expensive housing possible and utilities possible, medical, insurance, and monthly prescription costs, meals, Metro cards, and exercise, then add an additional 20%. Why 20%? Because no one, no matter how good they are at this, can land this exercise perfectly. You'll have co-pays, the occasional gift, unexpected medical costs, and a bit of entertainment. After all, you can't stay home and watch television all day, every day for the rest of your retirement. Your mind will go to mush and your body will soon follow. Once you have your Spartan numbers, compare that to your actual after-tax cash flow. That would be Social Security, perhaps any 401k you have, pensions. Use the 4% rule for something like your 401k and compare what you're spending with the Spartan budget and what you have coming in. If your expenses are lower than your after-tax income, then you're looking good for retirement. If not, you may need to get a part-time job, a hobby that generates income, or source support elsewhere, perhaps a family member. You now have a good idea of what your Spartan level expenses are going to be. If there's anything else that is an absolute must, add it to your list. Also, look at the list again and see if there's a way that you can reduce any of those items further by doing a bit more work. We'll talk about the more traditional type of retirement next, but if there's anything that is on your Spartan list that's not on here, put it in the comments section below so that other people can see it as well. Level 2, a traditional retirement. If you completed this Spartan retirement exercise and you still have extra cash, that's great. You can consider a more traditional retirement. Two things will change. First, where you live will probably change. You won't need to rent a room necessarily unless you choose to, and the use of an automobile will change. So first, put down the cost to run a home. If you rent a home, you're talking about rent. If you have a mortgage, you're talking about a mortgage payment. If your mortgage is paid off, you still need to pay for things like utilities and taxes. Those go on this line. You need to know what your total home costs are. Then add the automobile. This includes the automobile payment, the insurance, fuel, and maintenance of your car. The rough cost for all of this, by the way, according to AAA, is $10,728 per year. Now take this bigger number and add 20% to that number. Don't use the old 20% plus a new 20%. Discard the old 20%, the Spartan 20%, and just take all of your new expenses and add 20% to that. Level 3, a wealthy retirement. This is where most people actually want to end up. This type of retirement includes things like 2 or more cars, gifts for others, travel, charity, people who help you around the house, like a landscaper or a cleaning person, and perhaps even someone who runs errands for you. It depends on how wealthy you actually are. Where you live is also a big part of this. You may make the decision to move to an upscale community like Palm Springs, California, or Palm Beach, Florida, or Sedona, Arizona. These are all very nice, quite expensive, and wonderful places to retire. This last category, the wealthy category, has a lot of items on the list that don't fit into one of the 5 buckets. Still, you need to start somewhere, so start with the 5 buckets and then add on to those your items for your list. Regardless of where you end up on the list, whether it's Spartan, traditional, or wealthy, know that there are 2 things to consider. First, you can almost always bring these numbers down just by adjusting how you spend your money, where you put your priorities. Second, this video discusses averages, and you may not be average. So for your own benefit, talk to a financial planner who acts as a fiduciary on your behalf. Finally, as I discussed before, check out the video entitled Retirees Spend 80% of Their Income in These 5 Areas. How do you compare? I'll put a link at the end of the video right after this. Recently, our channel crossed 250,000 subscribers. This puts Holy Schmidt in the top 0.1% of all of the channels on YouTube. And if you're watching this right now, there's a good chance you're one of those 250,000 subscribers. So thank you for giving us your precious time. We're here to deliver for you. In the weeks and months ahead, we're going to continue to deliver cutting-edge, research-driven data for you to use for your retirement, as well as building on some of the foundational material that's here on the channel. Also, if you haven't subscribed, please consider clicking subscribe and turning on notifications so that you get alerted the next time we post a video. 250,000 subscribers can't be wrong. Here's the link to the video, Retirees Spend 80% of Their Income in These 5 Areas. How do you compare? This is Jeff Schmidt. Thanks for watching.